Oh, it's madness, man. It's if I didn't go to the gym every morning, or if I don't, or when I don't go to the gym every morning, there's basically zero structure in my life. Yeah, it's for the past, probably 5 years, it's pretty much been something different every day, which is maybe the only consistency, which is that it's always different.
How do you manage that? Like I empathize with that a lot. It feels sort of like the nature of what I do and what a lot of people do. And I almost feel like it's also the nature of like people doing new things. Like whether you're an artist or whatever, it's like that creative sense is that there's always something different to it. But how do you manage that balance of like giving yourself enough routine and giving enough flexibility for things to always be different?
I think, man, for me, that routine existed for a long time. I had that, and it's almost like I don't know if you can relate to this, but like when I work out or when I do something hard, I always, even when I do jujitsu, and when I'm in jujitsu and I'm in an uncomfortable position, I'm almost like, okay, I want to hold out. I want to see how long I can kind of stay in this position before I return to comfort, because it's going to make comfort feel that much better when I get there. So I kind of just embrace it. I kind of just embrace the chaos a little bit.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, I feel like that's something that I've been finding more and more. I mean, even with this sort of like new series of ventures for me in many ways, it's like there's always a new opportunity. There's always a new fire to be putting out. And the biggest consistency is that it's all stuff that I mostly care about, which makes it like there's pieces of it that's uncomfortable, but it's the nature of pursuing this thing rather than a comfortable, repeatable thing. I think something that like I struggled with earlier on in my life was almost using the flexibility as an excuse to not do stuff. Like I would be like, oh, my life's never the same, so I don't have time to go to the gym. I can't eat well. I can't, like, it was just a way to dodge things that were important to me. And it's like, I feel like I've found now that it's like, if it's important to you, you can either A, make it a part of your routine, or you can make it a part of the thing that changes every day. But it's really just like, do you care about it or not?
Yeah. Yeah, man. The whole, well, I was telling you on my way out here just now, if people want an extra 3 hours in their day, everybody wants another 3 hours in their day. And for me, it would be to find the right chargers and the right microphones and the right technical setup so that we don't start a podcast half an hour late. But for most people, everybody has the same amount of hours. And if there are people who can run, really, really complex organizations or complex programming or complex whatever it is, and still have time to hang out with kids, and raise a family and all of that, which is something that I don't have, there's time in the day. It's just a matter of prioritizing.
Right. Totally. I think sorry, go ahead.
I think we always, we fill our time. Whether it's filled or it's not filled, we fill it with something because we must. I have this tattoo that says invest your time. And, the idea there is that time must be spent. It's not something that you get to save up. It doesn't really work like that. It must be spent. And it'll either just be spent for you, like someone can just drain your bank account without you deciding, or you can invest it in things that, return to you. And to me, the way that looks like, or my perspective on that, is that the way it returns is a story worth telling. So, living in a way that you're like, man, I'm stoked about how I lived. I'm excited to tell that story, share that story that, brings me life. I think, in the end, all you have is a story, because we die in the end. That's like the surprise, everybody knows how it ends. We just don't know how to feel how it goes in the middle. I actually heard, I'll go off on a tangent. Go
No,
ahead.
hey, I'm all about tangents. You just brought something to mind for me, though, which is related. I've been reading this book, 4,000 Weeks, I think it's called, which is sort of about this and the idea of time management, and that a lot of productivity and time management is really a systematic avoidance of the reality that you can't do everything and you're going to die, and you just need to decide what's actually worth doing. And like that really resonates with me. This idea of like how much of my life gets full of stuff that I just don't care about or isn't important to me, but I feel like I have to do. And that sense of like, well, I really get to choose what I'm doing. And if what's valuable to you is having financial stability for your family, then like knock yourself out. And if what's valuable to you is not that, then like don't feel obligated that you have to do that, you know? And I think it's interesting because I'm curious if you have any experiences like this, because obviously motorcycles seem to be a big part of your life. When I was 18, I was going to the Cape Cod. I lived in Western Massachusetts at the time, and I had my first vehicle was an 87 Honda VFR 750, I believe, because I couldn't afford a real car. And so the best thing I could get when I got my license was I went and got my motorcycle license, got an old VFR for $1,000 and was like, I can go get to work with that. And so for a summer, that was my only mode of transportation. And I had so much fun on that thing. But one day I was going to the Cape and came around this back road corner, and there was a construction truck backing out into the middle of the road. And I ended up slamming on the brakes. It was ironically the rear brakes on that thing had always been a little bit sketchy, and I had finally gotten them fixed to where like the caliper got replaced. And so I think I wasn't used to how strong the rear brakes were then. I immediately locked up the backside, low-sided it, dumped it into the trees. I slid 100 feet on my jacket, which thankfully I was going on the highway, and it was one of the only times I actually wore my like riding jacket that summer, because I spent most of that summer in cargo shorts and a t-shirt, you know, thinking I was all that. But so I slid it. My right shoe came off because that was on the low side. My right sock got shredded. I dented my helmet. I tore up my glove a bit. But overall, the biggest thing was I just had a big bruise on my hip. But I remember it happened so fast that it was like you come around the corner and then in an instant you sort of like are just awake on the ground. And I remember my first thought was, I'm going to be late for church because I was supposed to play drums at youth group that night. And then my second thought was, do I still have all my limbs? And then I started like checking all my fingers and everything. And thankfully I was fine. But there's something to that experience of like the brutal confrontation of mortality. That's like, oh, this is so out of my hands and this can end at any moment. And I had another experience with that just like a week and a half ago where I had the stomach bug, woke up at 1 a.m, thought I was going to go throw up, passed out, landed on my head on the tile floor, and had no clue what was going on. And I just remember having the same thought because I was like, 1, I'm going to be late for my podcast together. 2, am I still alive? And then I remember I was laying on the tile floor with my pants around my ankles and just like feeling all the sweat and chills start. And there was something to that sense of like how absurdly special and crazy and important, and also like just how silly my taking time for granted is, and like how easy it is to not be present. And it's one of those things that's like, I've heard Dax Shepard, and I'm sure other people have said this too, the idea that's like, I'm glad that I got rich and famous so that I could realize it didn't solve any of my problems. And it's like, I don't wish anyone would have a near-death experience, but I do feel like it's sort of helpful. So for you as a motorcycle man, have you had anything like that?
I've had that's my life. That's our brand, you know? We have, I don't know how much stuff it's on now, but you know, we have these like circulating phrases that we use. And one of them is sooner than you think. And it's always, or at least in the beginning, it was printed on a headstone. And, you know, the idea is just to remind you of your death and to remind you that tomorrow is not actually a thing that you've ever actually been to, you know, and we constantly kind of put off our life until we look back and realize that we should have done it different. And our thing and my thing, and it has been heavily like, I've had that moment where I added up my life and went, okay, well, it's over now. But let me add up what I did. I went to Mexico a few times. I went to the lake on weekends. I did a pretty cool, I played some music, led some people, wrote some lyrics, traveled a little bit. Like, my life wasn't so bad, but I remember being like, yeah, it wasn't so bad. Like, I lived a decent life. And anytime you're like, no, not so bad, I lived a decent life, I really feel like that statement is you saying, yeah, I should have done something different.
Yeah.
You're saying I'm trying to reconcile this story rather than be honest about it and be like, yeah, man, I wish I would have done it differently. And if we could all just, come to that conclusion. I do this constantly, actually. If I'm having a bad day, I'm driving and I'll pretend, okay, that car just crashed into you, dude, and it smashed your left arm, and you're bleeding from your arm. Your arm's going to have to be amputated. You're trying to breathe because you got a hole in your neck. Like, that's where I go in my head, because every time something like that happens, you just wish that 10 seconds ago you would have made a different decision. If 10 seconds ago, if I wouldn't have been coming around so fast and this truck wouldn't have been backed out, I would have been able to slow down. Or if I hadn't switched that brake out, if I hadn't put that proper caliper on, my brakes would have worked like I expected them to, and I'd be fine right now. And when we have those moments, when we can imagine those moments and then return to right now, the feeling of gratitude, it's not as potent as it is if that miracle actually happened, where you got your arm cut off and then you could just reverse real quick and zig where you should have zagged, kind of thing.
Right. Right.
Or zag where you should have zagged.
Well, I think that's so much of the thing that has really, honestly, just finally been clicking for me, is this idea that when you frame everything as potential, that's like, oh, well, I could be a billionaire, I could do this, that, and the other thing, that when you exclusively view it that way, you are always disappointed, because the reality is you can't do everything, right? But when you look at it as like, I could be dead right now, every moment of every day becomes a gift. And are you framing it as a gift, or are you framing it as a disappointing lack of what you theoretically could have potentially done? And how does that affect how you show up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tell people all the time, return to your breath. If you go back anytime during anything you're doing, hopefully you're breathing. And it's just the most fundamental, simple, constant thing. You are always breathing. And the beginning of life begins with a breath. That's where that starts. And without breath, you die. But my belief, my perspective is that you didn't earn your breath. Your breath is a gift. And so if your breath is a gift, and if you ever want to try this out, just hold your breath for as long as I don't know if you ever heard E.T., the preacher man, do his thing where they walked out to the water and he held him underwater and he said, when you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, that's when you're going to succeed. He held his head underwater. But hold your breath for a few minutes and you'll realize, man, without that thing, none of my problems exist. Nothing exists.
Right.
And the reality is that you didn't earn that thing. That was a gift to you. That was a gift. So anything beyond that thing, which is your breath, anything beyond that is a gift. It's a blessing. It's extra. It's the sauce on top. And when you look at life that way, you go, oh, cool. So this problem I'm having today is just like a fun problem to solve in a game. What is any game that we play for recreation? It's a challenge we put in front of ourselves. It's a created problem that we have to solve. And, we get frustrated when we didn't create the problem or we didn't want the problem to be. But the idea that we ever even play a game where where we create problems for ourselves lets us know how few problems we have, or maybe is illuminating to the idea that life is a game, that if we view our problems differently, if we don't attach our self-worth or we don't attach whatever it is we attach to our problems, they would be fun to solve.
Right.
It's why solving other people's problems is often fun. Like, hey, let me help you with that. Well, you're stressed out, but have you thought about it this way? Have you turned it off and on again? Have you removed the battery and put it back in? And people didn't try doing that because they're just mad that they have the problem.
Right.
I worked at Verizon when I was in college, and a good portion of my job, at least the tech support part of it, was like, they're like, no, that's not going to work. Trust me, I've turned it on and turned it off. I've removed the battery, and you just do it and it fixes it. And like, I don't know how that worked.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's, it's super awesome that it worked, but it wasn't my problem. The way I saw the problem is so different from the way you saw the problem. You saw a bill that you pay and this money that goes out and this stress and this time it's going to take to visit the Verizon guy. And, you were angry when you came in here. And I saw like a battery that just needs to come out and go back in. Yeah, we attach so much more than is necessary to the problems that we have too often.
Dude, I so feel that even with what you guys are doing with Go Fast Don't Die, and in some ways what we're doing with Challenger, I feel like I've been coming up against this awareness of the message is so simple, right? And like almost sometimes I feel like there's this pressure to overcomplicate it or change it or make it more than it is. And how much of the real answers to all of this stuff, whether it's communication or marketing or, how you build a brand or how you build a business, is like the same basic stuff that connects everything. And that when you show up and are like willing to accept that everything starts to change at once. And that it is these like really simple, often really ancient truths that we need to be reminded of on like a daily basis, because we just so quickly forget. Yeah, man. So every Sunday we do an On Any Sunday email. I don't know if you've gotten those or checked that out at all. So I think it's, other than the actual human connection, the face-to-face interaction, which I think is number one, way underrated, all of the above, way undervalued, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's the most important communication that we do as a brand, because on social media, there's so much noise that just oftentimes, people, they just want noise. They want distraction. And so when you're trying to reach them with something that is maybe more meaningful or more than just a distraction, they're sort of like, nah, I don't want that right now, and in email, it's a different platform. It's a different place. It's a different sort of like, we're not walking into a club, in a big party where everybody's just trying to party and lose their minds. We're walking into a, call it a conference or whatever. Email is just different. Anyway, the other thing that does for us is every Sunday we get together and we talk about what should we say today, because we usually do that live on the spot. We don't have a bunch scheduled out. And we discuss it. And those discussions go for a couple hours of like, well, that's the problem. What's wrong with the world, right? And how do we present that problem in a way that encourages people to think of their solution? Because if you go try to say like, hey guys, here's the solution, it's pretty audacious. It's almost silly, because there's so many different people with different versions of issues. So you have to go to kind of the core of the issue and present them with this, and present people with a different way of thinking about it. But what we were saying this past Sunday is we climb up the hierarchy of needs until we can find a problem. Right before this podcast, I called a buddy who just quit his job. I posted on Instagram that he quit his job. And I didn't even read the rest. I just saw I quit my job today, and I called him. And I'm like, dude, you quit your job? And he's like, yeah, man, I just, that's just 9 to 5 financial stability and this, like all the things that come with having that job. He's a wildlife biologist, and he had a great job. It was a great job. Like it's wild to see someone, it's not so wild to see someone quit their entry level, whatever job. Fine. They can get another one of those at any time, but to quit a career, in pursuit of something else, it's
it's really cool. But about the climbing of the needs, right? Like the climbing of the hierarchy of needs. So, okay, so I have food and shelter. Good. I don't even know what the hierarchy is, but you're on your way to self-actualization.
Right.
You're on your way to this. And when we don't have food and shelter, all of our focus is on getting to food and shelter. And forget food and shelter for most of us, because if you're watching, listening to this podcast, you probably have that. And you have access to far more than that. But what's funny is, how many times have you been in your life where you said, if I just had fill in the blank, then you got that thing and you were still saying the same sentence with a new thing to fill in the blank. You know, that's a constant. It's a constant. And I really think that the only solution to that, really, because we can think about it for a second, like, oh no, I should be more grateful. You know, I've got a lot more than a lot of other people have, and blah, blah, blah. And you say those words, but do you feel it? And most of the time it's no. They're like, I know I shouldn't complain about this, but here I'm going to complain about this. And the problem isn't that you're complaining. The problem really is why. You know, where did that start? And it comes from a lack of proper perspective. So your perspective is your environment. So if everybody around me has rich parents and they drive a Mercedes when they're 16 and this and that, and I'm, you know, in the Hyundai, I think I'm poor. You know, my perspective is that I'm poor, I'm underserved, I'm blah, blah, blah. But if I'm driving a car in a village where no one has ever even had a car, all of a sudden I'm tip of the top. And it's your position is no different. It's the same Hyundai. But your perspective, the things around you. I remember we went and built a house in Juarez, and for this couple who had just had a baby, and they were living in a car. And I'll never forget this moment. I'm up on top of the house, and to my left you can see El Paso. It's right over the border. And you can see all these nice houses. Why they put like really nice houses like right on the border, I don't know, but it feels cruel. Because I'm sitting on this house, which is a shack. Most people that I know wouldn't stay a night in there. Certainly not in the environment that it's in the middle of. But I'm sitting there and I'm pissed. I kind of throw a fit because I had a lot of personal stuff going on in my life at the time. Part of the reason I was down there. And we had these nails, dude. And of course, like, it's a budget project. We funded the project. So we put money in, and then to buy the materials, and then we go do the work to build the house. And I was bending every nail, dude. And I was just getting so pissed because I'm like, why did we buy these crappy nails? I would have put extra money in to have these better nails. And I should take a second. I'm flush. I'm sweaty. I'm like angry, you know, and feeling sorry for myself. And I remember seeing Kevin here. I remember seeing Rob down there. I had made we had a little break, and I made like a hula hoop out of some pipe that was down there, some like plumbing pipe. And the husband, the guy, was playing his guitar, and the girl was singing with her baby in her arms. And they're looking at this garbage heap that I'm building for them, you know. And it was nice. It was fine. It was really cool by the time we got done. But in my mind at this moment, I'm like, they're watching me like just destroy their future home. You know, I'm like not doing a good job. And they're sitting there watching with more gratitude on their faces. I can feel from 20 yards away, they have more gratitude for this thing that I'm building in this environment with that to look at that they're not allowed to go to. And they've got more gratitude for it than I've got for everything that I own, you know, motorcycles at home and a house and in an environment where to even live in a country where my opportunity for growth is my own choice. That perspective, man, I return to that constantly. That perspective taught me gratitude in a way that can't be done by reading the motivational quotes on Instagram. You know, you need to go and experience it and feel those feelings and actually witness that in real life. And I wish more people would do that. I wish I would do that more often, you know. But yeah, man, life is Life is good.
Yeah.
Dude. You and I, we had technical difficulties. It was frustrating. I was sweaty by the time I got out here, right? Because my problem right now is that I got 3 computers and a microphone and 2 cables. That's my biggest problem of the day. Yeah, man, that's something to consider.
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's one of those things too, right? Where it's like, I feel like, even let's say for me, like within the world of like creative business endeavors, I feel like it's really easy to orient yourself to this sense of like, oh, well, like you said, like if I had this then, or once I get to this point then. And as I sort of like went around and explored more of the space, it was like, oh, there's people making a ton of money who are miserable. There's people who are making no money who are super happy. There's like, none of this lines up to how I thought. And so the way I think about it more is like, it's a question of orientation, and you can orient yourself wherever you are in the journey. Like, it doesn't matter. It helps to know the whole scale too. That's like, okay, you should know all of this, because when you only see your little world, you always think that you're at the bottom of it. And so it's like, let's show you the whole world just to give you a sense that like this scale's way bigger than is even relevant to you in many ways. And now let's just orient ourselves in a way that's like, how do I pursue something that's meaningful to me, that I care about? How do I be generous and give to other people? Because that's something too that's like, for me, I feel like it's so easy to get almost this myopic, self-absorbed sense of like, if I am in my own head every day, I take so much for granted. But when I go and like to what you said about physically going and helping someone, but even just like sharing what I've learned with people, I get some perspective on like, oh, I've been doing this for a long time. I have done a lot of things. I do have a lot of experience, and not everyone has that. And I get to be really grateful for the experiences in a way that when they're just in my head, I feel like it's easy to lose perspective of. And so I think that concept of like, it's a chicken and the egg thing, right? Where it's like generosity creates gratitude, which then creates more generosity. But it feels to me like you almost have to just start by forcing yourself to be generous, and that's where it's like, okay, now you start to have this perspective that's like, I have more than I think I do. Because the minute I get scared, back to the hierarchy of needs thing, you can have $1 million in the bank and be scared and be like, I can't help this person, I can't do this. You know, for me, honestly, like this has gone on with this endeavor right now where I'm like, man, like what's the cheap way to do this? And I'm a little worried about this because like I don't have an obvious ROI on this right now. And at some level, I had to tell myself, like, you're not doing this to make money. Like, hopefully you do, but you're doing this because you believe it matters. And so invest in it because it should be good for the people you're trying to help. Exactly. It's like, this is what matters. What's the money doing for me otherwise anyway? You know, I think that's the thing that I've found, is that in some ways I struggle with still talking about this because I feel like it's so important, but there's some part of me that hears me saying it and is honestly just like, fuck you, dude, the money wasn't enough for you. Like, I'd take the money and I'd be happy. And it's like, well, you wouldn't, but I get it. Like, no one wants to hear, hey, you know, I had more money than I knew what to do with and was still miserable. But I think it's the truth. And I think it's also like that, to your point, that number is arbitrary. It's like, what are you making up for yourself that's like, oh, if I had this, I'd be happy. It's like, if I had 5 motorcycles, if I had this camera, if I had this client on my list, it's like, I don't know about you, but every time I've accomplished any one of those mountaintops, I immediately gain sight of the next mountain. And so I can't wait for mountaintops. I have to orient myself to the journey.
That's it, man. You're spot on. Like, this is spot on to every conversation, you know. And I wish with Go Fast, we tried not to make it about ourselves. We tried not to make it about, 5 people from Wyoming or 10 people from Wyoming or whatever, however you want to kind of look at it. But I wish more of our conversations were recorded, because exactly what we're talking about is something that we're constantly, in discussion about. And what's crazy, man, is very likely when we talk about what we have in relation to our level of happiness or contentment, we think we got to add, and it's almost always a subtraction thing. To get more of this, we need to have less of this. And I think that if you went and it comes to, when you value having more, you just value having more. It's not I value what I have and I'm happy because it's more than what other people have. I got that to that point because I really valued having more and more and more. And it's a bottomless pit. I think if you can get happy by having yourself, it's an internal battle far more than it's an external battle. I've had some money and I've been in positions where I'm like, oh, I'm going to buy that bike and I'm going to buy that bike and I want that van, and I want to live this way. And I just have done it, and it wasn't easy. It was a lot of hard work, but then you get there and you're like, I tell people all the time who are married with kids, that I'm like, because they're always like, man, what's that like? You're single and you're, you don't have anything strapping you down. You could just go anywhere. I'm like, yeah, man, it's sad. It's I'm sad sometimes about that. And you are so fortunate to have something to pour into, something that's genuine, family and kids didn't happen by accident. We long for community. We long for strong connection. And, we only have so much water. The more you spread it out, the less deep it can be. And currently, I'm widespread. I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of people that I know, and I'm very grateful for all those people. I love all those people's stories, but I come from a small town where you kind of know everyone, and you kind of know everyone's story. And if you don't, you ask. And so when I started exploring and going into the world, I wanted to know everyone's story, and I got a lot of people's stories. And a lot of times that created a connection. It was really cool because maybe they were in a bigger city where no one actually cared about their story for the most part. Most people are focused on their thing. If you're not on a path to their success, you're in the way. And I was just curious. But what happens is you create this connection, you create this connection, you create this connection, and you can't foster them all. I used the analogy last year is I have a garden, and most people's garden, when they tend to it, they go and they say, okay, I'm removing the weeds. And that's easy. It's easy to say, that's a weed, I'm getting rid of it. That's a weed, I'm getting rid of it. That's a flower, it stays. But I have a garden full of flowers and not enough sunlight, soil, water to maintain all the flowers. So what I have to do right now is to go and is to get rid of flowers. I'm getting rid of good things for great things, kind of thing, and what the great things are is up to our own interpretation of what that is. And I think it's a pretty individualistic thing. We just have to be more honest with ourselves.
Right. Totally, dude. And I think that's something that's like, I feel for myself that sense of again, it feels bad. I don't know that it's the right way to say it, but almost like that burden of success, or almost like the opportunity cost of being good at something, because it's so easy to now become a slave to it. And it's like, oh, I'm good at this. I'm getting feedback for this. So now this is what I have to do. And I think I've spent years of my life doing stuff like that it's like, well, people on the internet like it, or clients want to pay me for it, or whatever else. And instead of going like, what is the great thing? What's the big scary thing that you would love to do? It's like, well, what's the thing that I'm good at, quote unquote, that people would like for me to do? And how much of my time have I spent avoiding things that I'm, quote unquote, not good at? And I was listening to this audiobook by this guy, Phil Jones, which is called How to Persuade and Get Paid. But he has this great little point at the beginning that was so striking to me, that he was like, we've got to make a deal. You're not good at anything. You're just in the process of getting better at everything. And how does that change how you show up? And I think that's like, for me, really helpful, because it's easy to go like, oh, I've spent most of my adult life as a cinematographer. I'm really good at making like high production value, expensive videos. And so that's what I have to do. And it was a Simon Sinek quote I think I heard a while ago, where he was like, BlackBerry died because they were dogmatic about the buttons. And like they were not in the business of buttons. And they got stuck on the thing that they thought they were good at, that they thought was important, and missed what actually mattered. And I was like, I think I'm doing that to myself with this whole like expensive camera, lots of lights, big production thing. Like, it's a great tool to have. I'm super grateful for that experience, but I'm not going to get dogmatic about the buttons with it. I'll talk to people on webcams. I'll make videos with my phone. I'll go do whatever I got to do, because this is about communication and connection, not about any of the rest of this stuff. But it's so easy when something's working to just keep doing it, and to not be honest with yourself, and to not be self-aware. And like, if you haven't had much, the minute someone starts giving you money, it's like, well, I should keep doing that, right? Because like the goal is to not go back to where I was. But the fear, I've never had anything good come out of a decision made in fear personally.
Yeah, man, I think, and how do you get rid of fear? So I was talking to another friend who, he's big into psychedelics, and I'm not. It's just not something I got myself into enough trouble when I was young that I, pretty much drug-free guy, and that's my steez. But I'm always open to hearing what people have to say, and he's not into psychedelics like, hey, I like to do drugs, dude, and get high. He's more like, this is a really interesting thing, and something that we're mostly afraid of, that comes from mostly propaganda. It's a lot of bad information, or at least a lot of information that was agenda driven. But he talked about near-death experiences, right? And feeling like you're gonna die, kind of like you were talking about earlier, but it's more of a simulation, but it's a really believable simulation. Dang, I had another point to that.
Related to that idea of like freedom to do what you want, or not feeling obligated to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, man, I've lost it.
That's okay.
But he talked about this sort of simulated, I'm going to die, and then you kind of come back to life with this perspective that you could have actually had a near-death experience. You could have gone and crashed your motorcycle, or you could kind of go to this place in sort of a controlled, safe, predictable environment with care. And then you come back with this perspective that is very real from this place that you went to, maybe spiritually, rather than physically. And you're able to kind of simulate those things. And it's just it's an interesting thing. You were talking about high production. So that's sort of, we haven't really gotten into this, but that's sort of your background is like high level cinematography.
Yeah, I mean, I started a little over 10 years ago, and I started with just like making videos for fun, and did like nonprofit stuff and church stuff and music stuff, and then sort of worked my way into the commercial world and like ESPN and stuff. And then, at some point, I think it's a long story, but ended up spending the next few years sort of working on a lot of branded content and commercial work for all sorts of different people, but lots of running around, my job being to make stuff look as good as possible for a lot of 60-second to 12-minute long videos for people. And like, I'm good at it, and I value it, but at the end of the day, like, I think for me, part of what I realized is the reason I'm good at it is I care a lot about what we're saying and how all the little things come together to reinforce what we're saying. And so it's like, how does our camera movement, how does our lens choice, how does our lighting, how does the color, how do all these things say the same thing? Because alignment is the only way we get this stuff into people's heads. And that's the thing that, like, I have so much fun with that. on a macro brand level. It's like, I don't need a camera. We can talk about that. That's like, how do you show up in your website? How do you show up in your emails? How do you show up when you answer the phone? And that's part of why I love what you guys are doing, because I feel like you are embodying this idea of like, we're going to put the essence of it into everything, and that's the way people resonate with it. Are you familiar with the Liquid Death team at all?
Yeah, totally. Brett, who's a business partner, he talks to one of their guys apparently pretty often. But yeah, they're great.
They're just like, it's in that same world to me of like, they take that idea and they just run with it all the way. That's like, they're not shy about it. They're just so bold, and like, you can sell your soul for free water. We're putting it on the can, and we're putting it in everything. And that idea of like the power of alignment of your message for actually having any real impact, and I think that's part of why I ended up sort of cutting bait on the cinematography thing. Was more often than not, I felt like I kept finding myself in a position where I was working with a lot of ad agencies and people who didn't honestly just seem to care. Like, they were sort of there to get the check and move on. And so like, alignment didn't matter. The message really didn't matter. It was just sort of like, well, we got our $200,000, say the things that you're supposed to say, run through the shot list, and move on. And there was a period where I was like, okay, great, this is a great way to get paid, but like, I have to care about this stuff. And if you don't care about this stuff, I can't be the only one that cares. So I'm going to go leave this and find other people who care,
It's a question of how much is your time worth? How much is your energy worth? Because what you're doing when you're spending your energy on something that doesn't return energy to you, you're only giving, you're not receiving, and you're receiving money in exchange. And I think that the inflation of the value of our time and energy is logarithmic. It just goes like this. And the more we've spent and the less that we have, and we don't usually start counting until like way too late, which is a big part of what I'm trying to do and we're trying to do, is like, hey, start counting now.
Yeah.
An ad that we are working on right now is basically like, okay, here's how much time you have in an average life, subtract X for however old you are, here's how much time you have left, and half of that's going to be sleep, or like a third of that's going to be sleep, or maybe should be, and a third of that's going to be your work, and a big portion of that is going to be the in-between, and here's how much time you have to actually do the things that you would say make your life meaningful. And so when you're part of something, you're also just perpetuating something you don't believe in. And it just sucks, man. It sucks because video and photo and any of those, any of that media is such a powerful and cool opportunity to tell a story, to really put something out there. And there are so many who are just getting their cash to get their thing done. And then it's like, and then what do you do with the cash? Yeah. Like, oh, I buy stuff so that people, so that I can get this approval from people that I don't know. And then what happens when that approval goes down? And that what does that approval actually look like? How does that show up in your life?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if I drive this car, people know that I'm the man. And it's like, well, who knows you're the man? Because if they really know you, they would know that you're the man based on whether or not you're the man. And if they don't know you, then they might decide that you're the man based on the car you drive. And is what you're looking for really the approval of people who don't know you?
Dude,
so
true.
I've written down 2016. I met a guy named Ryan Holiday.
Dude, I love Ryan Holiday. I'm slightly obsessed with him, to be honest. I have the Daily Stoic Journal and rip through it every day, but like Ego is the Enemy was a game changer for me. Obstacles Away is so good. It's like, it's so much. It's just so true. So
what's so cool about Ryan, and just all of his and I love hearing that, because I read everything that if Ryan writes it, I'm reading it. And a big part of that is because I was able to spend some time with him in a really intimate and special environment. We didn't make out, but we hung out face to face, and I'd probably make out with the guy.
I definitely would. If we ended up in a sauna or on some sort of ayahuasca trip, I'd make out with Ryan Holiday.
All right. Well, then we're all on the same page here. So we were at this place called American Safari Ranch in Colorado. It was this sort of like anti-conference. It was called Unlife, that a friend put together, and he was there, and it was early. I feel like he really blew up maybe that year or the year after. I think Ego is the Enemy maybe came out the year after that, or that year. I don't know exactly, but anyway, I didn't even know who he was. And so I'd ridden up the mountain to go to this thing, and when I was riding up there, I was like, in Denver, it was like 68 degrees. It was a beautiful day, and it was the fall. It was in September, and so I was like, should I ride up there? Or should I get a ride with you guys? And they were like, man, it's a gorgeous ride. Like, I would definitely ride if I were you. I'm like, cool, definitely had to ride. So I ride up there, and the wind starts blowing like crazy, blows everything off my bike. Like, it's all kind of stacked on the back, and it blows it to the side, and stuff starts coming loose. So I lost them because I had to pull off and kind of repack my things. And then I keep going, it starts to rain, and I'm like, well, this sucks. And then it's getting cold, and then it's kind of turning to sleet. And then it's turning just full blown, it's just snowing and like accumulating snow, and I'm going up a mountain. And I end up pulling off. I end up pulling off because I'm like riding like this, I'm like shaking. I'm like, and I'm riding through snow, which I'm on a Harley. This is not a good situation. So I end up pulling over when I saw this cabin over to the left, and I'm like, I got to go to this cabin. I get off, and I'm like shaking, and I'm like walking over to this cabin. I'm like, because I'm gonna die. I'm gonna slide off into the mountains, and like I'm gonna slide off and like die of hypothermia, and no one's gonna see me. So here's my chance. And I go over there, and it's locked, and there's no one there. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to break the window. And I'm gonna have to pay him for it, and like get a hold of somebody or whatever. But like, there's no service on my phone. I'm freezing. This is survival at this point. And someone pulls up in their truck, and he's like, what in the hell are you doing out here? And I'm like, my bike's over there. I just got in his truck. He pulled up in the truck, and I just walked over and got in. And he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, dude, I'm so glad you showed up. I was like, you're going to have to, I was like, do you know where American Safari Ranch is? And he's like, yeah, it's up the road, like, 12 miles. I'm like, you're going to have to take me there. And he's like, oh, I got a date, man. Like, I'm going the other way. I'm like, yeah, I know. It sounds cool and all, but you're gonna have to take me. He's like, well, I'll give you a ride a little bit of the way. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. And then he just gave me a ride the whole way because I was dying. Anyway, went to this thing, and Ryan Holiday's talking. And what's cool about Ryan Holiday to me is that I believe him. So authors, you can write a book and make a good amount of money, right? And you can have someone else write your book, and you put your name on it and make a good amount of money. It's a way to do things, right? Well, Ryan's really this dude. I didn't know who he was. Kind of this dorky, skinny guy in an Iron Maiden
So wait,
shirt.
was Ryan the guy in the truck, or the guy in the truck's unrelated?
Okay. Guy in the truck is unrelated. This is just my process to get up here. I was basically like, I was over this whole thing by the time I got there. So I'm like, I hope we find something good here, and we really, really, really did. But Ryan was one of the guys who started chatting or started talking, and he just so fired up. His whole story is really interesting. He kind of talked about the story of American Apparel and him working there, and he talked about writing for. He wrote for who's the guy who did Mastery?
Oh, I'm not sure, to be honest.
And like the 30 Laws. Robert Greene. Working with Robert Greene, and then writing for himself. And I had read or heard of maybe one of his books. It was Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator.
I haven't, but it's on my list.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's different than the rest of his stuff. It's real early, but it definitely makes you think about advertising, marketing, just getting the word out there in a very different way. And it's really, I think it might actually be based on, I assume it's based on Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
I haven't.
Have you read that? Well, that one will make you look at America with some sad eyes. But anyway,
I already got the sad eyes. I don't
so
need
Ryan
anymore.
was super believable. He was just. I know, same. I'm trying to be the change that I want to see in the world, right? But Ryan was just fired up on this whole Stoicism thing and the Stoics, and he was talking about the Stoics, and I'm like, man, I want to talk about anything the way you're talking about Stoicism. Because you just love this. You're just fired up. Like, you really believe in this stuff. And you know, you've kind of found your lane to play in, and you're in it. And yeah, so he started talking about Stoicism. I have a journal around here somewhere. No, that's not it. I keep these journals like all over the place, man. Anyway, he just started talking about one of the things he introduced was memento mori, which is remember that you will die, which has since become very popular. You know, I think we've maybe all heard of it.
I might have it on my neck right now.
You get it wrapped. Yeah, it's awesome, man. Anyway, I can't remember what exactly we were talking about when I brought up Ryan, but meeting him and reading his books has been pretty cool. I think he has a lot of good things to say, and I really, really appreciate, you know, when you can meet somebody and you just believe them. You know, you feel like when you read what they wrote, you know the process that was behind that. He wrote it, you know, or like these are really genuinely his thoughts. Pretty cool.
How do you think about that? Like, because I think about that in the context of sort of this idea of like authenticity and honesty, and like you said, like the ability to be fired up about something. And I feel like something we've run into a lot is this idea of like, well, what should I do? Like, what do people say about the algorithm and social? What sort of content does well? What sort of message does well? And it's like, if it's not authentic, I don't know that it matters. Like, if you want to learn how to do that in a way that you care about, great, and use it. But like, don't just do what other people are doing.
Bingo. This is exactly how we got onto this. I remember now. You were talking about just doing work that was not special to you, doing work that was, you know, perpetuated a status quo of just kind of bullshit all the time. And, you know, for that to be your story is incredibly sad, you know, for that to be the thing that you're doing and the thing that we're doing and the thing, because eventually it really is soul killing. Because eventually, if you're like, oh, I don't want to be doing this forever, man, there's a lot of grossness in this industry. There's a lot of icky feelings. You know, I'm working hard and I'm having moments of excitement because I'm like, oh, I really want to get this color right, or I really want to make this come through. I want to get the lighting right here, or the shot needs to be just like this, and you get the shot and you go through all that, and those little pieces are exciting. But when you look at like what's actually happening, what you're actually contributing to, you're like, oh, that's just gross. And what's cool about our brand and what's cool about Ryan and his books and his products is they don't have to be that creative and careful and perfect with what they're doing. They don't have to set that bar so high to create this cinematically brilliant or, you know, from a messaging standpoint, it's foolproof. They've looked through it because it's a dangerous place. It's a dangerous time to say anything. Almost anything you say or how you do it could be looked at and made into something it's not. But when you're just stuck to the truth, it's like that saying that, you know, liars have to have a great memory, or I don't have a good enough memory to be a liar, because you have to remember all the different things that you said and keep the narrative weaved. When you're just telling the truth, you can just continue to tell the truth. And if people are interested in that truth, then they'll be interested. And if they're not, then they shouldn't be. You know, this idea that if they're not interested, how do we figure out a way to not to get them interested in the truth that we have, but to get our truth to be interesting to them. And we remove the truth to be interesting, you know, and it just perpetuates this.
Sorry, you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
We'll play this game of chicken. Okay, I was curious about this because, like, I feel like this is something in our world that I see a lot of the times where I think about it now as like people who show up with a get first mindset. That's like if I'm going to make content, if I'm going to do photography, if I'm going to do something creative, my focus is what I get out of it. So I'm going to do, you know, this thing, or I'm going to make a brand. And it's like, why do you want a brand? Because I want to like have clothes with my name on them and make a bunch of money. And it's like, okay, well, like, I don't know that I agree with the founding premise of this whole endeavor, but great. Like, but I feel like that's the thing that so much of what is going on online right now that feels icky to me is this sense of like, what's bad is not teaching. Teaching is great, but so many people want to go, oh, I can monetize the first decent idea I have and then push it out to a bunch of people and not really care about continuing to help them. And like, that feels icky. And like putting out a bunch of video content that's like, my goal is to manipulate you into making a decision you don't agree with because I get financial gain out of it is like not something that I really care about. And so this idea of like, how do you frame things through impact and needing to have a mission and values, because that allows you to be expansive with it. And when you're starting from the idea of like profit and what you can get, you always seem to end up being reductionist about it. That's like, what's the cheapest way we can print merch? What's the simplest way we can make a video? What's the cleanest message, the shortest chain to get someone to buy our shit? And it's like, I don't know. I don't have fun doing any of that. So it's like, if that's the way you show up, I don't really think we're going to work together, or I'm going to be miserable doing it. And so like for you guys, cause like you make high quality stuff, and a lot of people say, well, why would you do that? You can just go get stuff from China that's super cheap. And it's like, but it matters. And why does it matter to you?
Well, your story, man, I think we devalue our time so much because your story, man, like so in that journal, which is I started at that retreat with that I mentioned, and maybe that was the segue into that. But in that journal, I had written down, you know, words. It was basically, what do I want people to say at my funeral? And that idea is really interesting and special, because at your funeral, you're done. Your story is over. Also at your funeral, all these people who don't really care, the people who saw the car and decided you were the man that they didn't know, they're not there. The people who are there are people that really cared. So first of all, like, consider your funeral. Who's there? Who's there and why are they there? And I think that's something we could probably pretty much answer right now at any time. I could say, okay, here's the list of people who would be at my funeral. And I'll like make a list of things that you want people to say about you. And the rule with this list is you can never tell anyone. That list is yours and yours alone. You don't get to tell anyone. But the way you're living right now, would the people who would show up at your funeral, who are the closest to you, would they say those words? Based on the way that you live, would they say Evan was this? Based on the way that you live, based on the way, and that's the truth. Like, that's such a way to boil down the truth. And it has nothing to do, it just doesn't matter how much stuff you have or money you have or wealth or whatever, because you're dead now. And so it allows you to work for things that are not, really valued by the world, or that we're not skewed to value because of our environment. I started that list, and I've since edited it a decent amount, and it will constantly change, but we should consistently ask ourselves, are we living in such a way that if we died right now, the people would the people we want to show up at our funeral show up? And when they showed up, would they say the words that we'd want them to say? Do we believe that? And if not, or if maybe, or if a little bit and not always, what do we change about the way we're living that would allow them to say those words. And it's not about valuing their words. It's about valuing who we are. It's not about what they would say and trying to get them to say it, but just they're going to speak truthfully. They're going to say, hey, this guy was this thing.
Right.
You know?
So how do you think about, because like I'm always sensitive to this idea, maybe I'm overly sensitive to it, but I love the abstract philosophical level of it, but it's like, okay, so let's boil it back down to practical. You're a creative guy working in a business that has to make money. I'm a creative guy who has to pay bills at the end of the day. So how do you think about, how do we show up in our products, in our messaging, in the way we spend paid advertising or organic advertising? And what's your framework for all of that? Because I think that's something that a lot of people, if they were to just listen to what we've both said so far, it's like, well, great. So I'm just going to give everything away and just say stuff that I believe in and ignore everything about how to ever make money, and I'll be broke and dead. That's the end of the road. And I don't think that's what we're actually saying. So how do we paint the rest of that picture?
What I would say is that, you know, that if you've taken an economics class, you learned about supply and demand. And the supply of truth and true passion, and the supply of people who are really pursuing something that lights them on fire. I think Ryan Holiday is a great example. You know, I didn't know who the guy was. I had no idea he was an author, other than he said, hey, I'm an author. My name's Ryan, blah, blah, blah. There was no service up there. You couldn't look people up. You know, you couldn't check them out on Instagram or check them out on the internet or whatever and decide that person's important and this person's not important. But it was an invite-only environment. So you kind of went, oh, everybody here is like a doer. At the very least, they're a doer, because there are people who get turned down to come here over and over again. And I had been turned down the year before. I didn't get to go, but Ryan decided, like, man, stoicism. I'm really, really, really into this. How do I take these things that are already said? You know, he's not adding to this, he's not adding to meditations. You know, he's not creating his own sort of book of meditations. He's reflecting on what's been said. He's reflecting on these ancient Stoics. And that's a pretty niche thing, you know, but he loved it and he brought it to life. And so it's a supply and demand thing. Authenticity is in low supply. It just really is. And I think the demand for it is often unrealized. So I think that if you can pursue that thing, well, you know, you have the internet, so you can, scaling is easier than it ever has been, for sure, in the past. It's maybe a little complex, but it's certainly, you know, more reachable. So to those people, I guess I would say, do the thing that it'll kind of work itself out. But if you decide, like, oh, I have to make money, I have to, yeah, like, dude, you do have to, you know, things have to be paid for. How do you do that in a simple way, which maybe looks like a job that you are not super passionate about, but you should be super passionate. You should be super passionate about that job because it is supporting the story that you want to tell. And no one's story is like, yeah, it was just super easy. Everything was easy. It all went super smooth. And then I'm a gazillionaire and life is really cool. And like, if that is your story, man, I feel bad for you, because the adversity that I've come across, or any great story, has this great adversity. You know, last night I was watching a clip from 300, and 300, you know, it's 300 Spartans fighting a freaking gazillion of Persians, you know, and they had to get creative with how they solved their problems. They met them at the hot gates where the numbers counted for nothing, and they, you know, just, who would you rather be? You know, one of the millions of obscure Persians who died fighting a battle that they weren't into, amongst people who they didn't know, didn't care to know, you know, like, or would you rather be, everybody died, you know, like a bunch of the Persians died and I can't remember, but like actually, period, everybody died, no matter what. None of the people that were at Thermopylae, none of the people that were back home in Sparta, none of the people in Greece that were there now are here now. Or they were there then are here now. So you all die. So it's about what's your story, you know? And yeah, you got to eat. But honestly, even that, man, it's like when we talk about the hierarchy of needs, our needs are so met living in America, you know? There are hungry people, but there's so much opportunity.
Right.
You know, and there are people who care, and there are programs, like there are a lot of places where like, oh, you're hungry and you're dying, figure it out or die. You know, that's it. And I just feel like, you know, the people who are really doing something special started by doing something different. Whether that's special in a way that they're making a ton of money from it, or special in a way that they love their story. Figure out what's special to you. That's going to be different for everybody. But yeah, like attach the struggle that you have to go through to doing something special. So if you have to get a 9-to-5 job and work that to support your thing, and then work for 3 hours after that on this thing that really, you know, brings you to life and that you want to be part of your story, what's the alternative?
Right.
The alternative is not do it, and you'll spend the last years of your life wishing that you had. That is terrifying to me, man.
Well, and I think to what you were saying earlier, it's like the thing that I feel like, again, almost comes from this like greater awareness and perspective, and part of what I'm hoping to help share with more people is this idea that if you have something you believe in, there's more and more options to be clever, to indirectly or through a sideways angle or some other thing monetize that idea to the level of having your ideas met. Because I don't know how you think about this, but like at the end of the day, I think about you guys as being in the truth business, and you happen to sell clothes. And so like that's it, man. If you look at most of what we put out, you know, occasionally we'll post about like a special edition shirt or something that we think has a cool message to it. But most of what we put out is life content. You know, it's us living. It's what it looks like to live. And it's a message that says, you know, over and over again, the same thing, which is, you know, your time is finite. Your time is the most valuable commodity you've got. You don't get to check your balance ever. You don't know when you run out. And you should value it really, really high. You don't get to get more. What else is there that's like that? You know, so the idea of investing your time, that's like that is the whole thing. And so like if you look at our stuff, you don't see a ton of product. You know, you don't see a bunch of like, we're not a fashion company. You know, we're not a streetwear brand. We're a lifestyle brand, and that lifestyle is very. It's funny because it sort of manifests in our life as like we go ride motorcycles and travel and share campfires and do that, which we love. But that's the thing that we wanted to do. So if that thing is not motorcycles for you, that doesn't mean that you're not, you know, a part of our tribe. That doesn't mean that you don't subscribe to our same worldview and ethos, and that we couldn't share moments and share community and share connection. This is just what it looks like to us, and other people it's mountain bikes, and they go hiking, or they are an ultra runner, or they, you know, like to design or program software. What, like, you know what I mean? But it's what you want your story to be, the story of your life, something that you're going to be super happy with. There are a lot of people. Money is such it's such a tough thing to avoid, and you know, the quote of like, I'm so glad I got rich and famous so I could realize that's not it. I wish everybody could get there. I wish everybody could show up at that, like, oh man, if I just had this, if I just had this. Like, if you look at a lot of people that are, you know,
really rich monetarily. They have a ton of money. They don't maybe look rich, you know, and a lot of people who aren't rich, maybe they are dressing to look that way, as if that there's a look to it. And dressing to look like the thing versus doing the thing, I just don't understand how that reconciles with your best story. You know, I lived a life where I looked like I had a lot of fun.
Right.
You know, one of the things that we posted, and we post consistently as a consistent message, is it's not what it looks like to you, it's not what it looks like to them, but what it feels like to you. And I think that's got to it's dude, like, you know, I love your stuff, because every time you post, you know, you're teaching. Almost always you're teaching. There's something to learn from the stuff you're posting. And so you're just contributing, you know, you're contributing something. And you tell me, like, but I feel like that feels good. You know, it feels good to give. It feels good to be of value.
I think that's one of the things that's like, because I think about that sort of wealth signaling. Like I hit that period probably a few years ago when I was sort of at my, I would say my peak ego, right before I sort of had my dark night of the soul, where I was like, I'm going to go buy Ultra Boosts. I'm going to go, like, these are all the things that now I have money I can do. And at the end of the day, I think it was more than anything, it was trying to signal to myself and to everyone else some sort of state change that hadn't actually happened. But I think the thing that is true about that is that what you're trying to do is say, look, I'm so clued in that I can afford to be wasteful, right? You're like signaling the ability that I'm not paycheck to paycheck. I can give things away. And for me, that's one of the things that when I try to show up on social, it's like, I'm going to show you that I can afford to be wasteful with my ideas. That, like, I'm going to be generous. I don't have to hold on to these. I've got enough of these in here that, like, I'm just going to give them. And if you want them, great. And if you don't, that's totally fine. But, like, this is a way that I can show up. And instead of signaling, like, look at my camera, look at my equipment, look at, you know, people, there's all these little games that happen in our culture that's like day 4 of question mark. And it's like, okay, we get you're on a big shoot. Or like, oh, you know, NDA, can't tell you the client. And it's like, okay, great, flex. And it's like, it was something this guy Blair Enns said a while ago that I thought was interesting, and it was on the topic of thought leadership. And he was like, thought leadership is powerful because it signals that you have the time to take time to invest in other people. That, like, people who are always in their own world, they may be trying to signal that, like, oh, I've got this or I've got the car, but, like, you can't fake taking the time to share your thoughts with intention. And I was like, it's so true. Like, it's an unfakeable signal. You can fake the BMW. You can fake the house. I've met so many people who have everything that you would look great on their Instagram, and it's paycheck to paycheck still, and they're on payments, and none of it's real in the way that I would define real. And it's like, I don't need any of that. I don't, like, I have no shame talking about my financial situation, but, like, all you need to know is that I have the time to show up and give away my time and expertise to help the world be better at communicating every day. And that's an unfakeable signal of generosity. And to me, that feels so good. Like, that's something that every day, finding out that someone got something out of that someone was able to communicate to their friend or to their client or to whatever else in a better way, or to pursue something that mattered to them, like, that's so much cooler than trading my time to some commercial client for money so that I can buy shoes so people think I'm successful. Like, what even is that, you know?
It's a culture of wanting more, you know, and trying to show that we've got it. It's which is who is going to, you know, it's like, okay, write the story of you. And do you want the story of you to be like, do you want the story to be, he really showed off? You know, he really showed off his ability to be wasteful. He really, you know, he really made the world think that he was this, even though he was this. Like, nobody's going to want that story, but we get sucked into it. And yeah, I guess our thing is trying to break people free of that the best we can. The reality is I can't tell anybody what their best life is, you know, and I don't want them to believe me. That's an inward thing. That's not an outward thing. That's not a thing to ask the world. That's a thing to question yourself, and the best way to find it is to get rid of so much noise. It's about having less. And if you had nothing and nothing to do, what would you do? You know, what would you want to do?
I've been talking about that.
And, you know, we get so busy.
Yeah. I've been talking about that in the context of creativity, because it's like, I feel like even talking to musicians and filmmakers and people, it's like, or the business thing, right? Let's say, okay, because in many ways, I feel like at the end of the day, I am similar to you in that it's more of a message than it is the medium. And it's like, what are all the different ways that you could be clever with, you know, Ryan Holiday makes money off books or whatever else he does. Like, there's ways that we can sort of monetize the message. But I was talking to a friend before this call who's a musician, and the question I asked him was, if you could make anything, which you can, what would you make? And it's like such a simple question, but for me, it's so easy to show up and be like, well, this is how it goes. The way you make money with cameras is you do this. The way that you get money as a songwriter is you do this. The way that and so that affects all your downstream decisions. And it's like, okay, pump the brakes real quick. If you could do anything, which you can, you just don't know everything you can do, but you can do anything. Let's come back to your mom telling you could be anything. You are a world of possibilities right now. There's no sunk costs. You can cut bait and turn anything right now. If you could go make a motorcycle clothing brand, if you could tell people to live their lives, if you could, do whatever you're doing, would you be making real estate listing videos? And if you would, that's totally fine. But I think for a lot of us, it's like, we don't even think about the possibility because we're stuck in the thing that's right here.
Yeah, and I think even a step further than that is, it's like if you could do anything, what would you do? If you could do anything, which you can, what would you do? But maybe even more important is what would it take for you to be satisfied by doing the thing you would want to do the least? Like 5 years ago, I started riding a motorcycle all over the place and meeting all sorts of people and going to some crazy parties and going to some crazy events and meeting some really wild people and some famous people and doing a lot of things that as a young kid in a small town, you sort of imagine would be the dream. And when you do that, you do all that stuff and you're like, one day I want to blank on, it would be so cool to do this and blah, 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 and all that. And you did those things and you have pictures and videos of it and like, you did it all. You sort of filled this list and you're like, man, I'm not satisfied. What is missing? Because I did these cool things that were so exciting in their time, but now I'm not really interested in going and doing those again. If you can win the war of being really content and joyous, I've got this clip somewhere on my Instagram. As I was in Mexico and we were at this little, this really rad little, it's kind of a hotel, but it was a Mexican hotel. It was like this whole courtyard and it was just gorgeous. Well, I was up in the morning doing lunges and there was this guy who was doing all the trashes and he was singing. He's up early. He was up earlier than me and I was up early. And he's doing the trashes and he's whistling and singing and just having like the greatest time. And I'm like, man, this dude, I don't know what he gets paid for this, but it ain't much. I know that. And he's emptying trashes, he's emptying our trash, which is, certainly not glamorous. And he's up doing it before anyone else is even up. So he doesn't even really get the recognition. So he doesn't get paid. He doesn't get recognition. It's not fun. It's stinky. It's gross. But he's whistling in a way that I ain't whistling. Like I'm not whistling like he's whistling. And none of the rest of my group are whistling like he's whistling. And it's that perspective, man. If we could return to our breath and come back and be like, man, I'm breathing. Everything else today is a gift, and really actually do that. I can say that. And even in this moment where we're exchanging, like, I don't really feel that. I'm thinking about, the stuff I have to do later today. And I'm thinking about, how we got this California trip coming up, and I got a motorcycle to race, and all that stuff's in my brain. I'm like, but if I could really spend some time and come back to my breath and be like, man, life is cool. Because I guarantee you that if we were sitting here right now, or if we were somewhere right now and we're bleeding out and trying to stop ourselves, which may be the way we go out, but we go out somehow. If we could go to that moment and wish that we could return to this moment right now, we would feel totally different returning to this moment. Yes. You ever seen Click?
Yeah.
Adam Sandler? I'm pretty sure there's 2 movies, man, that I've like really, really, really bawled. And one of them was The Mule.
Clint Eastwood movie?
Have you seen that?
I have not.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's super funny. I was on a plane to Bali, and I watched that movie, and I don't know what it was about. I don't know what it was, because I'm pretty sure if I watched it again, I'd be like, oh, come on. Like, some of the new Clint Eastwood movies are kind of super bad, but I watched that, dude, and I'm just sitting next to this Asian woman, and I'm just like, sucking my lip in. And the other one was Click, which is so funny because it's an Adam Sandler movie. But, he just fast forwards. He just fast forwards, and he just fast forwards. He just, let me get through this. And then he's at the end. And that movie, dude, just freaking hit me like, I should watch it again. It's been a while, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. And that thought, and if we could just return to the moment right now and realize how freaking blessed we are, how amazingly good it, like, we live in another person's absolute self-actualization, best case scenario, better than their wildest dreams. The bread comes in a bag, I put it in the toaster, it comes out toast. Like, the coffee I buy at the store and I stick it in the thing and it comes out delicious. And the creamer is better than anything the cow ever made. Just like, we're just in such abundance. It's crazy. And we lack such gratitude because of the environment. Man, I feel like we're like discussing these big sort of, we're talking about such grandiose worldviews that we haven't even gotten into like anything practical or like down to like, I don't know how long we've been chatting.
80 minutes. I want to be sensitive to your time too. Do you have like a hard out here? We can wrap it up.
I've got something at 3:30, so
we can get to the end of this. But yeah, man, no, I've super appreciated this. I mean, I have a whole list of more practical questions that we haven't gotten to, so maybe we'll have to do it again sometime. But I mean, this is honestly more even in line with, I think, my hope for this conversation. I think the practical stuff is fun, but it is like, this is the real stuff that then all the practical stuff feeds into. It's like, if you have an answer, if you're listening to this and you have an answer to that question of like, if I died tomorrow, what would I do today? And then you still have the question of like, how should I structure my social media content? Like, I can talk to you about that. But if you don't have an answer to the first question, like, I don't really care to have the second conversation, And I think that's so much of all this stuff that's like, totally. I would love for us to get into how you think about branding and merch and, the quality of a brand and how you show up for people. But this foundational, like, I've tried to avoid in the past time stamping things, and I've decided that this podcast is slightly experimental. So this is the first one that we've actually recorded, and I think it's perfect because like, this is the foundation of every other conversation we would ever have after this. And it's like this question of how are you orienting yourself to your life? There's 3 things that I try to hold myself up against. I have 2 necklaces. One says Memento Mori, which is remember you die. The other one says ad astra per aspera on it, which is like through hardship to the stars. And the third thing is I have sort of this like modified version of the Serenity Prayer, which is acceptance, bravery, and discernment. And this idea that's like, I had never learned the Serenity Prayer growing up. I was a very evangelical person, but it's almost closer to Stoicism than I feel like a lot of what I was taught Christianity was. But this idea that grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's like, that's the whole game for me, man. You know, if you're going to talk about anything, if you're going to talk about the internet, if you're going to talk about merchandise, if you're going to talk about your business, it's like, what can you control? What can you not control? And can you tell the difference? And remember that you're going to die and you don't know when. But then also remember that in every obstacle here is like limitless opportunity. And that's the thing for me with the through hardship to the stars thing is I need to also balance out. Because if I'm just like, oh, well, I could die tomorrow. So, you know, let's go the way of bacchanalia and I'm just going to do drugs and, you know, take because I'm going to die. It's like, no, there's a whole lot of potential in this whole thing. And the little kid you who was going through some hard stuff has been inspired by people who've chosen to put up a fight, and you get the chance to be that for someone else. So like, you might die and that should affect how you show up every day, but you also need to show up every day. And the fact that like the stars are on the other side of every hardship here. And that if we can do all that, then like now once we're oriented, let's talk about business stuff and tax stuff and messaging and lighting and logos and branding and all this other stuff. But that's all downstream. And that was the thing for me with why I think I had to make the change was like, I felt like I was downstream and I was surrounded by upstream people who just didn't care about any of that, you know? And it was like, well, I'm a cog in a machine that I just don't really believe in at the end of the day. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing and this conversation, and I'm totally down to do it again. I had a last question for you, which is sort of just a chance to put our heads together. Not that I necessarily have anything to offer on it, but also for the sake of other people. What's your personal biggest obstacle right now? Like, what's the thing you're wrestling with, whether personally, business-wise? Like, what's the devil on your shoulder?
That's a great question. You know, you brought up earlier, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. I think my biggest obstacle is figuring out what flowers to pluck out of the garden. You know, you plant all these seeds and they're all meaningful, or they all could be. But none of them will be if you don't remove some of them. And that's terrifying. You know, the idea of removing, not so much removing people like, hey, you're no longer in my life, but being, you know, saying like, I can only give you so much time because I have to give these people some time. And that gets really obvious when you have a wife, right? Or when you have kids. But when you have friends, and a lot of them all over the place, and your time is, you know, they can reach you at any time through 100 different means. Just deciding what to put your in. I'm excited about everything, man. I love martial arts. I love fitness stuff. I love, you know, the study of humans and how they interact. I love interacting. I love motorcycles. I love going on trips. I love exploring the world. I love creating things. You know, I love creating content or just media that strikes people, that makes them stop. I love entertaining people throughout the day. And it almost begs the question, if you say you love all of those things, do you even know love? You know, because how could you love so many things? How could you love so many people? Do you really love anyone, or do you really love anything? And that's the thing, man, is it's, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So pick. And so my current, you know, what I'm currently doing is removing a lot of the things. So I've planted a lot of seeds over the last however many years, and now I'm trying to, and they've grown, you know, but I can see that not all of the flowers are coming up at the rate or at the health that they should. And it is because these other ones that are also coming up short are not getting the attention that they, or they're getting the attention that the other ones maybe should get. So it's about saying, which flower's got to go.
I feel that, man.
Do you have any?
I mean, it's exactly what this book, 4,000 Weeks I've been reading is about, which is so much what we've been talking about, but just this idea of, what do you really value and what do you really want to bet on? And that, this idea that, yeah, we can talk about if you could do anything. And I think the book does a really good job of engaging with this idea that, like, commitment to anything is fundamentally saying no to every other possibility and getting comfortable with, they almost talk about it in the context of, like, accepting that settling is a part of life, that, like, when you get married, you are settling because before you make that decision, there is an infinite number of future possibilities for who you could meet and how they could be or whatever else. And at some point you have to make a decision to say no to all that potential. And that so often we don't make decisions because saying no to the sea of potential feels more painful than saying yes to the reality of the thing that's in front of us. And I think I empathize with that a lot in so many different ways in my life. I feel like mine is sort of similar. I mean, I have, like, relatively smaller struggles that's like I'm still tempted to rename this podcast because I don't know that I think it could better communicate what we're actually trying to talk about and say here. But I think my biggest obstacle right now is, like, similarly deciding, okay, you've opened up the door to, like, doing a bunch of things you care about, but you care about a lot of things. So, like, what are you going to focus on? And are you willing to sort of, like, wait till you see the whites of their eyes in some ways? Because I do think there's this sense of, like, for me right now, I am honestly saying no to all of the ways that I normally get money to do a bunch of stuff that I believe in. And it's really easy for that fear to kick in. It's like, just go back and do the thing you used to do. Just go back and dip your toes in it. Like, just go. And it's like, I don't need to really, which is a privileged position to be in, right? But it's like, how long are you going to hold on? It's sort of a game of chicken, and how long are you going to hold on to going, I think this could pay off. I think this could pay off. I think this could pay off. And how much do you really believe in it? Because everyone believes in it until it comes down to the brass tacks of it, right? So I think that's, for me, so much of that is, like, and making those decisions is, like, what do I believe in and care about more than anything else? Because I like a lot of things, but in any given moment, like right now, to be honest, I love fitness. Fitness is not the number one thing for me. So I'm not waking up at 6 a.m. and going and doing CrossFit and running and swimming and, like, because right now I care about betting on this. And so I don't have an answer for how to make that decision, but I totally feel that it's like, it comes back to the privileged problem of a glut of opportunity, but we're all in that at some level, right? Like, there's always more stuff we want to do than stuff we can do. I don't know.
I think it was Soren Kierkegaard, who's just sort of a miserable wretch of a person in history. Or I don't know if I think it was Kierkegaard who, like, he got engaged and he was like, he broke it off and was like, I know I love you too much. If I get married to you, I will basically become bored of you, and I don't ever want that to happen. So, like, it's a no from me. But one of the things that he wrote, and hopefully I'm not misattributing it, but he wrote this sort of basically was like, you'll regret it either way. So do this thing or do that thing. Marry this person or hold out. You'll regret it either way. And it's funny because it's like, oh, that's a horrible thing to hear. But it's for me, it's such permission, because I'm like, oh, cool. Either way, I'll regret it. Like, those feelings will exist no matter what.
Right.
Pick one and go that way. And, like, there's a reason that the windshield is 30 times bigger than the rear view mirror. You're going forward. And so look through the freaking, look through the windshield and move forward, and don't constantly second guess everything you're doing. Yeah, we put that in on any Sunday, and that was one of the ones where I'm like, man, this is really good. I always love it when it's like, man, this is mostly stimulating for me. I'm mostly just doing my own therapy here, and if other people have some of the same problems, like golden, but this is mostly for me. That's most of everything. That if I ever put advice on the internet, it's just something that I'm saying, hey, Brady, here's what you need to hear right now, you know, far more than it is like, hey, I'm the authority on this matter, and you guys should hear it.
Well,
I think, dude, we should do this again, and we should, you know, I feel like we connect on some levels, which is obviously, that happened before this. We just didn't know why. And now we know a handful of reasons why. You've got the memento mori, like the challenge coin or whatever it is around your neck, which just says that we share some worldview for sure. And I think that maybe the next one of these we do, now that we've sort of talked heavily about the whys, which should be the foundation, maybe we start talking a little bit more about the what. But I think that's really what we've said is, you know, what we've volleyed back and forth on. Why are we doing what we're doing right now? Why have you stopped the, you know, high production cinematography stuff that pays the bills well? Why did you stop? And why are you doing Challenger? And you know, why have I pursued, you know, the life that I lead? And kind of what is our worldview? What do we value? I think we've kind of dug into that. Maybe the next thing is what, because to be honest, like I don't have a great understanding of what Challenger is or wants to be, or what that perfect scenario looks like. I always start when I interview people for jobs. I always say like, hey, what's perfect for you? Walk me through an absolutely perfect day. What time do you wake up? What time do you go to work? And what are you working on? And what does it look like around you? Like just really envision all of that. What's perfect? And what time do you get off? And if the answer is like, well, I only want to work like, you know, an hour a day, basically doing nothing and get paid a lot for it. It's like, no, you don't. That's not, you know, that's not actually true. If you actually did that, you'd be just deeply unsatisfied. You should want to work on something that you want to work on. So how do I, when I hear your ideal scenario, something that like, oh, I'm going to have to peel myself away from this project to go home at, you know, 5:30 so that I can hang out with my wife and then maybe do this social, whatever. Like I want to know all of that about a person so that when I'm placing them, or what I can either arrange, you know, so I can arrange the job for their best case scenario, you know, or arrange their best case scenario around a different thing. Because I really think there's an unlock of like 80% of someone's output when you can put them in an environment where they're where they really feel like they're valued, they're doing valuable work, and they're pursuing something that is genuinely interesting to them. It's actually a part of their story. It's actually, it actually services their story. And man, that's my big dream for everyone, is for them to get to the end, whenever that is, and have a smile. I've reached that sort of moment where I felt that for myself, and I really wasn't smiling about it heavily. You know, I was trying to smile, but it was forced, and I felt it. And I would love it if everyone was there. And I think the beginning of that is you start with the why, and you find the what. And I think the advanced version of that is, no matter what, you can't take my contentment away from me. And how do you sort of get there? How do you become that garbage man? Well, that garbage man probably has a better perspective than most of us, because he probably was brought up in an environment where he's very grateful to have the job as a garbage man. And he doesn't aspire for everything in the world, which is what we seem to be addicted to. You know, we want more. Well, look, a culture of more is it's an intricate thing. I wouldn't demonize culture of wanting more. I think a big part of like us becoming who we're supposed to be is pursuing us being a us being our best, as a sort of a give back, or a way of reflecting gratitude for the breath that we were given and didn't earn. But there certainly is a place where we value the things, where we value the more than more than the why we want it.
Totally. I mean, and I think that's a big part of what I see as the vision for Challenger. Like, you know, there's some element of it that right now is we have a lot of, you know, marketing and content creation skills, and that's still something that we can do for clients through the lens of this perspective that we have. But for me, like the real, I think, dream, the bad way I have of explaining it is, I think what Red Bull has done for adrenaline junkies, I would love to make for people who care about doing meaningful, excellent things in the world. That's like Challenger for the way that anyone who wants to go out and backflip a bike wants to have a Red Bull helmet on. It's like, if you want to go, if you're going to run a 2-hour marathon, if you're going to build the next Uber, if you're doing anything for the sake of that idea of, to me, of like the pursuit of possible, not for the sake of what it means for you, but for what it means after you, and the willingness to sort of shoulder those obstacles and to say, I'm going to go figure this out, not because I get to sit back and work for an hour a day and chill in the Bahamas afterwards, but because it means something for other people. That, like, that to me is what being a challenger is, and telling that story through the lens of everyone who's willing to share their version of that story. And then, like, however, you know, my joke is always like, Red Bull is really a media company that sells drinks, and that's how they happen to monetize all the media. So I guess that's sort of the thing that's like, for me, visual communication is a obvious medium, but at the end of the day, it's the message. And it's like, however you can get the message out there and however you can monetize that, whether that's a book or a podcast or, you know, selling conferences or memberships, or I don't really care. But like, that's the thing that's like my dream, my perfect world would be someday someone does something sick and they somehow are able to see themselves as a challenger, and some kid who sees themselves as incapable of something is able to put that on and go, I'm going to go do something hard because I think it matters. Like, that's the thing for me more than anything.
I love that, man. Culture changes everything. Culture is what you're talking about is putting positive culture from your mind on a pedestal and giving them something giving their story life. So giving their intention something that can be tangibly received or consumed by people, and making that thing cool. If we could, you know, I love living in Wyoming because people think it's cool to be nice. They think it's cool to be kind. And a lot of that comes from, you know, necessity. If you're not nice, you'll get run out of town. You won't live here because it's too small. You know, what'll end up happening is you're rude to the person who, you know, is going to teach your kid, you know, or you're rude to the person who is cooking you dinner that night, you know, at the place, or your server or whatever. And so you kind of create this culture of accountability in a small town. And I really, really love it. I really, really love that. But culture is everything. If you want people to stop, you know, using recreational drugs, which I'm not saying that they should or should not or whatever, I think whatever on that. But if you want people to stop, the answer is not go, okay, drugs are illegal now.
Right.
Like, I actually think that's the worst. Because now what you're saying is, hey, do it all in the dark. No one will be educated. No one will, you know, right? Where if you were to just want to educate and empower people and say, hey, people are smart enough and intelligent enough to make their own decisions. And if we tell them that, then they will believe that, and our people will have a more intelligent society. I think man, I think we click on a lot. Like it's almost funny, this conversation, because I'm like, yeah, you're just going to agree with what I'm saying, and I'm going to agree with what you're saying. Not because I want to appease you with my agreeableness, but I'm like, no, we just have we just really share a lot of the same beliefs, which is very cool, because now you almost want to move on to the next thing, which is, okay, well, how do I challenge what you're doing to make you better? Right. How do you challenge what I'm doing to make me better? Which maybe if we, or when we do this again, which I really think we should, because I have this mic now and I know how it plugs in, and I got the computer. Like, I really think I could do a better job the second time. But maybe we get into just, doing something in real life. I think one of the things that's funny is we spend a lot of time, we as in just sort of the big we spend a lot of time talking about what's wrong and how we could do better and what we believe. And that's almost, the most frustrating thing about talking on Instagram is people are like, I needed this today. I needed that today. I really needed this today. I really needed this today. And what I notice is, I'm like, man, it's the same people saying that they needed this today. So maybe it wasn't actually what they needed.
What are you going to do about it?
Because they're constantly being told. Exactly. What are you going to change? Yeah. What are you actually going to do? So maybe the next one is we actually. No, that'd be great, man.
Hey, I'd love an excuse to visit Wyoming, but I think it's so. Actions speak louder than words. And that's like, for me, I think part of what's cool about what you guys do is that you are an embodiment of your philosophy, right? It's not abstract. We are that thing. And I think that's something that, for me, it's like, for a while on the other side of the curtain, it's easy to be like, and I hear this from all sorts of people now, but the sense of like, oh, people just want short dancing ass TikTok videos and jokes. And I was like, I don't actually think that's true, but I can say that all day long. I'm just going to show you. And I think that's so much of what we all need to do is like, let's show you what's possible. Everyone said, oh, you can't run a sub 2 hour marathon. And Kipchoge said, fuck you, I'm going to show you can. And you listen to him talk about it. And the whole thing is like, we need to show people what's possible. And for me, it's like my little, skill set of creativity and making things and telling stories is like, I'm going to start with myself and tell my own vulnerable stories and tell the truth and not play the game that everyone's telling you have to play. And it's going to work out. And hopefully that encourages you that you can do the same thing. And that's like, we can all think about it and talk about it, but are you going to be about it? And I think that's one of the things that I'm so excited about this podcast for, because I think there's going to be lots of really cool actual stuff that comes out of these conversations. Like, the conversation's great, but what do you do about it?
And when you say it, I'm going to do what I'm going to do and it will work out. I've been trying to encourage people, especially content creators, who are like, they're frustrated because they sort of, Instagram is not what it once was. It's very hard to get your stuff in front of people now. It's much harder than it once was. And you got used to, all of the chemical effects of this approval or this mass approval. And then when it drops off, nothing in your world actually changes, which is so funny, but the number's down, It's the same thing as like your bank account or your investments or whatever. Like, okay, my numbers say 50,000 today. It's a good day. It's a beautiful day. Oh, my numbers say, 6,000 today. Today sucks, dude. I'm miserable. I should just go hook myself off the nearest building. And there's nothing different. The weather's not different. The way it touches your skin is not different. Your money's like, it's just numbers on a screen, It's not even like it's not like your resources are depleted or like, oh, there's no food in the, like we just make these things up. And so just the idea of like, when you say it's going to work out, I really think that putting more stock in, what story do I want to tell? And if you said like, I just really feel like if someone said like, man, who's the artist? I don't remember the artist, but somebody who it wasn't Leonardo da Vinci, I don't think, but some artist he created. And he never sold anything while he was alive. I can't remember who that was, but I'll figure it out and I'll message you. I also want to share something else with you that I'll share when we're done, but and maybe we'll get into.
I think it looks like it was Van Gogh.
Van Gogh. You know, everybody, Van Gogh, right? He chopped his ear off, yeah? And then people know about that. But you know who he is. You know, he's got all the notoriety and the things and the whatever, but he never sold a single painting. You know, he never sold a bit of his work. And he just did the work because that's who he was. And we all die in the end. So what work would you do if you knew it wasn't gonna, what would you do if I heard this question posed. What would you do if you knew you would fail? If you knew it was going to fail, what would you do? What would you do anyway? Man, that's a great question to ask. Because probably if you do that and it fails, it didn't really fail. It just failed based on a standard that was made up by somebody else. Because if you would do it even though you knew it would fail and you did it, you succeeded. That's a kick in the ass that I wish more people would accept. So they just go do the thing, and probably in the process of, even though I know this is going to fail, I'm going to do it anyway. Something is going to happen along that path where someone's like, "Hey, you think you could do that over here?" And you go, "I never thought about it, but yeah, I guess I don't see why not." Like, well, that would be super helpful for me. I'd pay you big bucks to do that thing over here. And you go, okay, that's the path. But if you never start, man, you're just going to stay. Change starts with change.
That's so good.